Our subject today is karma, right?
It is karma and forgiveness.
And forgiveness.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked a lot about Normatology, and we talked about the eternal return of the same, like everything is circular and comes back to the same place over and over again. Now, this was the shared worldview by anybody until like 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. Eventology came along, and Eventology is essentially the idea that, no, it's not exactly the same thing that returns. There's a small difference with each loop. And that small difference is, say, accumulated information. So you store information outside of your own brain, and suddenly you write things down, and the next generation can then inherit more information than you ever had. And that idea, of course, is maybe one of only 2 or 3 major ideas that humans ever come up with, was Zoroastrian's idea 3,700 years ago. And that's the beginning of Eventology. Now, what's also interesting with that is that this enables something that didn't happen before, or exist before. It's called forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And we talked a lot about lynch mobs in the past. And we all 3 met in Denmark this last week. And we talked about that the current lynch mobs we're seeing everywhere right now are pagan. Mm-hmm. All right. So if they're pagan, that means they're probably also prevalent in the East, because Hinduism is still a pagan religion. So, and certainly there's a lot of paganism going on in China. So we have a problem here with Chinese and Indian culture. We have a problem with their own heritage that's popping up again. We're not even Christian any longer. We've gone back to paganism.
So we need a good definition of what you mean by karma and what you mean by forgiveness. Like, what is karma pop notion of karma? And then there is a more sophisticated version of that. I think perhaps the same is true about.
Okay, let's not allow karma to escape the cheap way here. Let's confront karma with all the problems that are inherent in paganism. Okay, so karma originally is a pagan concept, and it is that anything you do, it will undoubtedly follow you until the day you die and possibly into your next life. That's why it's also tied to reincarnation, because everything returns to the same, means you might also be reborn. So reincarnation and karma are tied together. They're very pagan concepts. And essentially, this is what the lynch mob is after. The lynch mob, when it's attacking you, if you're the scapegoat, the lynch mob will tell you that there is no forgiveness. There's no way out of your sins or out of your shame. You must die.
Yeah, so it's total predestination, and that is a vulgar notion of karma from my point of view.
I don't say it's a vulgar notion of karma. I think that's what karma is. If you want to elaborate on that later,
okay.
I will allow you to, certainly.
No problem, I will.
Because I would love to say Buddhism from this if we can. That's basically the theme for this conversation. So the problem is that, though, that what Zoroastrian then discovers, and this is the original sense of forgiveness, the Zoroastrian sense, is that, oh, wait a second, if there's difference with each repetition, that means it's actually great for, say, a youngster to be able to do something and then make a mistake and learn from the mistake and then do it again. This is essentially also how life works. I mean, life cannot work without memory. Without memory inside the cell, there's no point to life at all. So memory is as early as a cell becomes a life form. So there's always some kind of memory, because you will memorize your previous experiences, as Whitehead would say. And through this experience, you would then, if you have a memory, also learn so you don't repeat your mistakes. So the Zoroastrian sense of forgiveness is very simple and very ethical. And this is probably Zoroastrianism think it solves the lynch mob problem, because essentially saying, no, wait a second. There is no eternal condemnation. There is no sin or shame in that sense, because actually you can be forgiven for your acts, not your sins. You'll be forgiven for your acts if you have failed. And this is essentially the Zoroastrian notion of forgiveness is the very simple one you do when you do entrepreneurship. It is, oh, you failed, try again. And if you failed again, try again. Mm-hmm. That is forgiveness to Zoroastrians. It's strictly ethical imperative, nothing else. But the problem is then both that this does not exist in paganism, because everything returns to the same, means there is no forgiveness, there's no way out. If you do something, it's eternally valid.
There's no way out of karma, basically. Yeah.
That is original karma. The problem, though, is to me, is the Abrahamic religions, of which Zoroastrianism is not a part. The Abrahamic religions with Judaism and Christianity and Islam also have the different versions of forgiveness. I think Judaism has the most sophisticated one. Yom Kippur is a perfect example of that. But in Christianity, there's also forgiveness, but it's loving and caring. It's called mercy. But the problem is, in those religions, you have a perfect God. And if you have a state of perfection that you relate to, you end up with actually what the Muslims eventually do with their tawbah, whatever it's called, tawbah and ghafir. But the different concepts within Islam of forgiveness are basically is that you made a terrible mistake, you must go to God and ask for mercy and never ever do it again. But there's no learning experience involved in that sense of forgiveness. And this is my problem with the Abrahamic forgivenesses. So we have a problem on one end, which is the karma, vulgar karma you called it, which then generates pagan lynch mobs. The other problem is a forgiveness that comes out of a point of mercy from an omnipotent, omniscient, perfect God. But Zoroastrianism doesn't have perfection. It doesn't have a perfect God at all. It has forever change. That's exactly why I think that is the forgiveness I want to work from. How does this relate to Buddhism?
I've got a few comments about that. I think the point of Buddhism basically is to kind of transcend karma, for one thing. So it's the whole point of Buddha. So it's a bit like grace or something like that when you transcend karma. The whole point is that you're not bound to the past, and that there's a way to go beyond karma, and that there's an open future in some sense. Like there's this creative open future. So that's what I would say is a more.
But how does forgiveness relate to that? I mean, who forgives whom?
Who forgives whom? Well, the forgiveness is probably, I would say it's like the awareness of the karmic knot is what breaks the karmic knot in some sense. So that's why Buddhists meditate and try to break through this karmic knot to experience.
I find that dissatisfying. What does Thomas say?
Yeah.
What is your experience of Buddhism in relation to the unforgiving and the forgiving?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind when I hear you, that is that maybe we need to be a bit precise about what paganism means here. I mean, paganism has a very precise definition, or it's a very precise concept in the Girardian context, right? I mean, it's the old story, right? So there's conflict in the community. You find a scapegoat, you kill the scapegoat. That way you pacify the community and you deify the scapegoat. Now, so that's basically the essence of paganism, right? And you said something about like Hinduism and China, that had a lot of paganism. So I'd like you to unpack that a bit.
Okay, I should maybe call it Normatology. So a Normatology without Eventology is all we had, as long as you could only memorize in our own heads.
But then the question is in Normatology, let's say if you have a culture that puts the emphasis on Normatology, is that automatically a pagan culture?
It is pagan in this sense. It's pagan in the sense that karma cannot be forgiven because there's no authority to forgive it. That's exactly why I believe that's when you create a lynch mob and remove your karma and put it on somebody else so you can clean yourself.
Why do you need an authority to forgive karma?
Well, you're responsible to somebody if you act. You're in the tribe. Mm-hmm. Your actions have repercussions to the tribe's interests.
I would interpret this karma more in the sense of like in the Nietzschean sense that you have to go beyond being the man of the herd. You know, the Das Man that you all also touched upon in previous podcasts, the unobject, that you have to go beyond that. Because that's karma, right? The karma is basically just, well, you're thrown into this society that has this generalized opinion, and you can just follow that, and then you can kind of see that as a certain karma, right?
Yeah. Well, there's different levels of karma. Like karma just means action, right? That's the literal meaning of it. So there's you're born into this world of karmas, right? There's your personal karmas and your family karmas. Your national karmas. And
but Andrew, have you used that? I mean, I've done. I mean, this is a kind of an aspect of Buddhism that somehow kind of
Well, I was looking at Trungpa, who often has a radical shift on things, but the Vajra is a thing that it breaks karma. It just cuts through karma, right? So that you can experience the now sort of thing, and so that you're free of past burdens. And you're free to act in a sense. So that's his interpretation of karma, which is perhaps we could say there's a Hinayana version of karma, right? Or there's a Zoroastrianic version of karma, which is just like do good things, do good actions, right? Make, good actions to have good results. And that's the kind of like very simplistic, if not very interesting.
Yeah, that's always have this
version of karma. That's the nomatology he's talking about. There's no way out of it, right? You just have to keep doing good things and be a good boy.
Yeah, but that's sheep shooting. That's what happens if you do a bad act. That's what's interesting. Where's the forgiveness part of this? The fact you should do good acts. You're recommended to do good acts. Yeah, that's a truism in any culture, right? But here the question is, what if you do the bad act? And what kind of bad act is it? There's intentionally bad acts, obviously. There are just bad
let's
acts
say you're a murderer,
right?
right? You're a murderer. Can you go beyond the karma of being a murderer? And the answer is yes.
Again,
of course you can have forgiveness, right?
No, the different reasons
that's what all the stories are.
No. Wait a second. The different reasons why you're a murderer. You can be a warrior. You can legally kill somebody.
No. I mean, like a crime. If you commit a terrible, heinous crime and murder a family or something.
According to which standards?
So that was Milarepa. Milarepa did that, and he practiced all this black magic, and he was very into paganism, right? And he met his teacher, and his teacher said, build these towers, continually build these towers, and then smash them down again. And he became free of the karma of his negative acts, and he was forgiven. Not forgiven by his teacher, but existentially he was free.
This gets weird, but okay, I want to go back to the social aspect of this because I think we need to return to the lynch mob because that's where we started this conversation, like several episodes ago. Mm-hmm. So my problem is this, that if you move, we realize we have a problem here. It's called karma. It's universally a problem. Your acts will haunt you, whether you like it or not. Mm-hmm. And culturally they do. In a nomatological society, which was any society on this planet for, let's say, the last 200,000 years until very recently, that was a given. Bad acts had repercussions. The only way to not have bad acts was to basically say bad acts are completely unacceptable. There was a zero tolerance toward bad acts. That's essentially what, deep karma would be.
I'm going to object again. I'm sorry. In the Odyssey, the gods do all kinds of bad acts and they get away with it. And
you're way later in history. The Odyssey. You're way beyond. This is nomatological. Eventology already happened. As soon as you have written literature, you can't say
there's no ethics in those early stories, right?
They're not early stories. They're recent stories. Mm-hmm. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of years here.
Okay. Anyway, go on.
Okay.
Expound a little bit more.
Where we social biological reshape was in the Sociant. The Sociant lasted over 60 to 70,000 years. The Odyssey is way after that. You can't use written literature here to make an argument.
The gods, the whole thing that Thomas is talking about, the pagan lynch mobs and the
that's later. That's later again. That's after nomatology. That's after exclusive nomatology followed by nomatology plus eventology.
That's absolutely. I mean, that's at the beginning. That's how we became humans.
No, wait a second.
This is a continual argument we always have, actually.
Zoroaster is 1,000 years before the Odyssey. Zoroaster knows already then that eventology is a fact. So, no, the Greeks were immersed.
Well, the Egyptians, we're talking about a world where people believe in gods and wrath,
Gods
and
are
fate. They
also,
believe in predestination and fate.
Nomatology is all about forefathers. It's ur-mothers and ur-fathers. It's not about gods even yet. The Chinese never even went for the gods. So, wait a second. My point here is this. It's about the lynch. It's about the mob. It's about society. You got to get rid of this excess. There's an excess here of bad acts. Somebody got to solve that. And of course, the way to do that in a Girardian way is basically to put the blame on a scapegoat, take anybody who won't protest, make that person the scapegoat and drag them through the streets and kill them, and you get the release. So there's not only envy, which Girard is correct about, there's also a release in terms of the karmas being put on this creature. So in Christianity, Christ on the cross does both. Both throw all the sins onto him, but at the same time, obviously, he's an example of what happens if you scapegoat somebody, so we should avoid scapegoating. You can argue both, and it's brilliant with Christianity. I don't have a problem with that.
Christ takes on the scapegoat.
I think Christianity's strongest point is its forgiveness, but I want to argue here, I started with Michael Butler last week in Denmark, but I want to argue here that the Christian sense of forgiveness and Zoroastrian sense of forgiveness and probably Jewish in between are different, and they're all rich. These traditions are rich because they try to deal with how to avoid the lynch mob. What Zoroastrians basically do is they say, okay, bad act, if it was intentional, major problem, but at least a non-intentional bad act is not Druj. Druj is all about intentions. Evil is all about intentions, Zoroastrianism. It's an ethical principle without moralism. So basically, that's why Zoroastrians are great entrepreneurs. That's why they're the wealthiest people ever known on this planet. The Parsis of India is the wealthiest ethnic minority ever invented, right? They send their kids to school, they get great degrees, and they go out and conquer the world. Now, how do you become such a successful culture if you don't have a principle that's actually very clever? And that principle is that, oh, you made a mistake. Listen, try again. That is original forgiveness to me. If you go back about 4,000 years, because of eventology, I would argue that it's impossible unless the event happens, and the event is neutral. The event can be ecstatic or it can be traumatic. It's just difference. And you can prepare for that. So that means when you notice that there's a difference with each repetition, you start to plan for the next repetition. That's what civilization is. You start to plan for, okay, we're gonna go for another loop now of the eternal recurrence of the same. Let's make the deviations something more productive this time rather than destructive. This is Asha versus Druj to the Zoroastrians. So Druj is actually that I ignore it, I let the repetition happen. The difference that come out can be anything. And usually it's traumatic. Usually it's terrible, right? Because nature will go towards the terrible, the traumatic, unless you try to direct it towards the event, the ecstatic. Okay, so you go towards ecstatic, or you create an authentic event. This is Alain Badiou, by the way. This is all phallic philosophy. Alain Badiou's Being an Event returns to this idea. You can direct the future by planning for it towards the more constructive. That's Asha. Now, in that process, you discover, and by the way, if we do go towards the traumatic, or we intended to go towards the constructive, great, okay. Can we learn from that? Yes, we can, because we're a life form that has memory. We can actually store that information. We can write it in the books. That's you start writing Bibles. You write the book of Job. You write Cain and Abel. You write all these stories. This is what happens if you do wrong. So by reading the story, you can avoid making that mistake.
So there's some link to literacy and forgiveness.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's interesting.
Zoroastrianism and Judaism are children of that. And then Christianity takes on the more sentimental version of that, which I think Nietzsche properly criticizes because he finds it meek and weak. Because the forgiveness in Christianity somehow becomes too generous or too sentimental. And I think the problem Nietzsche hasn't really found out is that the more perfect you make God, who's the authority who gives the forgiveness, the more perfect God is, the more you eventually resort into the trap where Islam ended up. And Islam, there is no forgiveness. There's only repentance.
Well, I have something to say about that in terms of the Jewish tradition, because in certain aspects of the Jewish tradition, God has a dark side. It's called the Siddha Atra or something like that. Like God is not only good and pure and absolute. There's also a dark side to God. And so a human being's job is actually to help God. That's just part of this part of the Jewish so we have more of a purpose here rather than, let's say, a Protestant idea where you're just sort of there's just this predestination. You're just sort of bound to karma.
Love this.
So in Judaism, you do these acts. They're called mitzvahs, right? In order to help God, because God's really bored if human beings are not there to help in this creative act. So is then forgiveness? I find that a beautiful.
Wait a second. Is then forgiveness in Judaism a social event or is it a divine event? It doesn't really matter.
I'm not sure. I don't know. I know much about what they do for forgiveness.
Okay. What's important here, though, is that you just described the concept of God, which is imperfection. And in Zoroastrianism, there's no perfection at all. It was invented by the Greeks way later. So the Ahura and Mazda are split phallus. That in itself says it's not infinite, it's a finite entity, and the finite entity is not perfect because nothing is ever perfect because the world is ever changing. Frasho carete. So that's the point. So Zoroastrianism, I think, gets away with this. And it's a question we brought up before, is that why did the Zoroastrian empires not have tons of lynch mobs? They were apparently incredibly rare in the Persian Empire. Incredibly rare. And Zoroastrianism was
probably because they had a way of dealing with karma, I would say, like a correct way of dealing with karma. That's how you prevent the lynch mobs, right?
No. Well, wait, partly, yes. But you got to have a culture, a proper culture of forgiveness. But the forgiveness must not be sentimental and devoid of reality. It must be related to something real. Now, the question I return to then is that how has Buddhism throughout history tried to solve this? Because I think it has to do with the Buddhist attitude towards the lynch mob. Because as long as you've got karma out there, and karma is a fiendishly hard thing to get rid of, and you can only do it on a personal level, but not on a social level, I see the lynch mobs are still there in the streets. I don't see how you actually get out of the lynch mob culture unless you have a social function that forgives the sinner, or forgives you, not repentance, but properly forgives you, so you can try again. Because if you allow people to try again, you can't kill them. Mm-hmm. The whole idea of the death penalty disappears in a culture where you're allowed to change your ways and you can be forgiven for your past.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you think, Thomas? Do you want to riff on that?
The classic way to avoid mobs, to avoid scapegoating is prohibition, religious prohibition, so that you avoid too much envy and jealousy, because that's what leads to mobs. Yeah. So that's why all religions have very, very severe prohibitions with respect to sexuality, because sexuality is an extreme source of envy and jealousy. So that's why what for example, Christians get very wrong, right? So they think that there's something inherently problematic with sexuality. There isn't anything inherently problematic with sexuality. It's just that it very easily leads to jealousy and envy, and that's why you need to be careful with it.
Yeah. Well, I lived in a Buddhist monastery, and there are confession rituals. You confess you confess your karma, I guess, to other people. It could be your thoughts, could be similar to, I guess, Christianity. There's a kind of confession process.
But the confession is followed by the blessing. In Christianity, you're free from your sins. Off you go. Do you do that within Buddhism? Do you do that within Buddhism? Did you practice that within Buddhism, or is it just you let your heart out, you pour your heart out, and you tell people what you've been up to? But that's you do in any 12-step program.
Yeah,
the 12-step programs do not offer you forgiveness.
Well, yeah, there's the same. I don't know. I guess the difference between Catholic confessional is you go and meet somebody and he forgives you or something. Whereas
the forgiveness is the point, not the confession.
Yeah.
I'm back to what Thomas just said, though. I agree completely. So this is what Christianity runs into problems. To me, Christianity, its problems increasingly come out of mimicking previous, what I call the major religions here. I would consider Christianity and Islam as minor religions, and I think Islam has enormous problems, because Islam is like, it's like the pop culture parody of what went before it. Certainly the relationship between Zoroastrianism and Islam is clearly that way. The same thing I think with Judaism and Christianity. There's a richness into these religions the older they are, and the older they are, they come less out of these sort of Platonist ideas of perfection and infinity and immortality. Because if you get immortality out the door, if you get infinity out the door, you get perfection out the door in a religion, it's probably a really good religion to work from. You see what I mean? It also doesn't then have a problem with sexuality. It realizes that the problem is envy. Because I don't see the Jews and I don't see the Zoroastrians or the Buddhists having a major problem with sexuality. I think
they don't.
Christians wrongly focus on sexuality itself instead of focusing on that sexuality is one of those things people fight over. It's just, and therefore they replace envy with sexuality itself as a source of sin in Christianity.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's I think we all agree with that. Whereas, you might go and live in a monastery and you might avoid sexuality, but you don't consider it to be something evil or.
What did Thomas say?
Well, in the sense that Christianity tries to do the right thing, but they don't really. It's that they confuse the means with the ends, right? So basically, regulating Christianity is just regulating sexuality is a means to an end, and that is to limit the proliferation of envy and jealousy. So in that sense, we disagree.
So you have the institution of marriage and all that.
Inherently problematic.
What did you? Can you finish that, Thomas?
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, Paglia. In this sense, I mean, as much as I like Paglia, but there we kind of disagree with Paglia, because she kind of says that that sexuality is inherently Platonic, that it's inherently problematic. It doesn't really have to be like that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's where you go utopian, Thomas. This gets interesting. This is a whole new direction for tonight's conversation. But I love it.
Well, Paglia says art is sort of like,
wait a second. Andrew, I love your talk, but in this case, I'd love Thomas to elaborate more on the difference between Hamelryck and Paglia when it comes to sexuality as such. Please do.
Well,
I think I got it, but yeah.
It's something that I read also. There was a book about Girard's theory, and there was somebody who wrote something about the view of Camille Paglia, and Paglia kind of sees, maybe I'm remembering this not correctly, but basically the idea is that sexuality is inherently problematic as a problematic thing, but but if you look at it from the point of view of why is it problematic? Well, it's not inherently problematic, but it's just because it's one of those things that lead to jealousy and envy. And that's the real problem. And jealousy and envy will come from all kinds of areas. So you can get that from material greed, you can have that from prestige and stuff like that. So in that sense, there is so Christianity has a big focus on sexuality that is a bit that makes it a bit unworkable for many people. I think that the views of Christianity with respect to sexuality is something that has turned many people away.
I remember Paglia also saying that the power of the Catholic culture, right, is the fact that they repress sexuality, and then so therefore it
I think that's
into all this art and power and.
I think that's totally wrong.
That was Paglia's
story that religions use sexuality to gain power. I mean, I never really understood that. How would that happen? That's not what they're doing. They're trying to avoid people to become jealous and envious of each other. And if they do that, you get conflict throughout the whole community, and they start killing each other, or they start killing scapegoats. That's why you have all these religious prohibitions.
That's also why you try to distribute wealth within communities in all religions as well. The same thing. And this is obviously problematic in the Persian Empire, because then you got the Gnostics who said we should totally even out the wealth, which is, of course, the Mastakites. The origin of Islam and of socialism in the West starts with Mastak and his idea that we should basically have a state that takes all the property so we can then distribute it according to needs, right? The vulgar version of Marxism is the same thing. When Marx, for example, said that to each according to his needs, he meant to each according to his needs, considering who's going to work tomorrow morning, meaning that the workers should have more than anybody else because they're going to go to work the next morning. He didn't mean according to body size or anything like that at all. That's vulgar in Marxism, one of the problems with the attacks of Marxism. They don't understand this. But Mastak creates that problem. So that was an inherent problem of Zoroastrianism, because within an empire, it was really hard to distribute wealth to the extent you avoided envy. So avoiding envy is central to religion. I agree on that. But I disagree, and actually agree with Paglia here, because sexuality is problematic, but problematic here is in a Deleuzian sense productively problematic, because it's ambivalent. And anything that dances on ambivalence, your own subjectivity is another example of that. You can never really agree on who you are. You can never really understand yourself. That's the point. According to Hegel, that is yourself. The self is that which is concerned with being a self and cannot make up its mind what it is. That is being a self to begin with, according to Hegel. So the same thing goes to sexuality. Subjectivity and sexuality are very similar here. The same thing goes for the worldview. We can't really agree on how the world operates. And because we can't agree on it operates, we'll stare at the stars every night. And there are, riddles out there on how the world operates. And this, of course, it's the origin of science and curiosity. It's like we can never really nail how the world works. And that is ambivalence. And I think sexuality should more be compared to subjectivity in science than it should be compared as a moral problem. It's the thrill
or an artistic problem or something.
Yeah, the thrill of it is that it never reaches a balance. And this is what we want to avoid here. The Taoist fantasy of the yin and the yang reaching some kind of balance is what I'm against. I think there's always three, not two. And the third force is always the one that starts everything, gets everything moving again whenever you're close to anything that looks like a balance. That's why, for example, contemporary law concerning sexuality is completely deranged. There is no such thing as a contractual consent before you fuck somebody, because the fuck is going to be terrible if you do that. And that is problematic, right? But it's a good problem. It's like Deleuze said, the problems are fantastic.
But it seems that I think that when I hear you talking also about Zoroastrianism, then it seems that it's about skills versus not having skills. It's about constructive action or action that actually works and that accomplishes something in the world versus clumsiness or ignorance or just lack of skills, rather than good versus evil.
Oh, there's the good versus evil in Zoroastrianism. Remember, this is the most misunderstood concept or religion ever. Anything you've heard about Zoroastrianism, forget it. Okay, read the original text, go to the West, and you discover the good and evil didn't even exist as concepts at the time. They're probably Egyptian and come much later. No, what existed, Asha meaning how things work. So why not operate in a way that actually is aligned with how things work? That means just basically optimize your thinking, optimize your speech, optimize your behavior. That is the principle that every Zoroastrian uses in the meditation every morning. I'm just going to optimize myself during the day. And that is Asha. And then the opposite of that, Druj, is essentially, oh, you couldn't care less. And because you couldn't care less, you go envious of others who've actually made an effort. And that starts a destructive spiral that becomes poison within a society. That is the understanding of Druj, and I prefer to use the original terms here. So forgiveness here is essentially, I will not forgive you if you don't seriously mean you're going to try again and learn from your previous experience.
That sounds like a bit Aristotle, who said it. Apparently the Romans mistranslated Aristotle. Aristotle, he didn't mean good and evil; he meant excellence or something. Or
yeah. What do you think you got that from?
I think I probably got it from Heidegger, but
no. What do you think Aristotle got that idea from?
Oh, right, the Zoroaster.
Yeah. Okay. So if you study it, Heraclitus and Pythagoras are both court philosophers in the Persian Empire. I mean, the connection between Persia and Greece is just embarrassingly underrated, right?
So there's not this Platonic good and evil. It's more of a pragmatic, idea.
Yeah, and actually, you and I had a conversation with Jan Söderqvist that he reminded me that I cannot put Neoplatonism under the same umbrella as I do with Platonism, because with Neoplatonism coming out of Alexandria in Egypt, the influence from the Persians had returned, and it was a monist understanding of the world. It's actually acceptable. Plotinus gets really interesting when you start studying him. And that, again, is that the influence goes back and forth in the Hellenistic world. So that happens all the time. Okay, Söderqvist has a problem with that. I think it's fantastic. I think the Hellenistic world was fantastic, but it's the crossbreeding of these ideas that actually we're still working with today. Makes sense. So how about the Christian forgiveness here? Nietzsche.
I want to go back to forgiveness because I don't think we've gotten to the bottom of no,
let's go to the Christian version here, because no matter. I think it's the best thing Christianity gave to the world, and I think it has paid off handsomely in the West for the last 2,000 years. It's been incredible. I mean, we couldn't have limited companies in the corporate world unless you had a Christianity that had forgiveness implemented into it. And you went for a confession, you confessed, you took it all out. And actually, I think forgiveness in Christianity, because you have to forgive your brother or your sister in the congregation, is a way of getting rid of a load. It's just like either you have to carry this heavy weight around it. Actually, somebody did something nasty to you, or you were involved with somebody who did something nasty they shouldn't have done, or whatever. You want to have it undone, and the way to have it undone is to learn how to forgive.
Yeah, but it avoids the escalation, reciprocal escalation, because if somebody did you wrong, okay, you react by giving that person the same thing, and then that person again reacts, and then so you have, that's the typical escalation. So that leads to mobs, and that leads to scapegoating. So Christianity very much tries to diffuse that mechanism through forgiveness.
Yeah, and it took until the end of the 19th century or something before it stopped in the Balkans, right? And it was, again, a pagan heritage. It's just like somebody killed you in this village, we're going to the next village and kill one of theirs, then they come back here and kill us, and it goes on forever. It's exactly these escalations that you try to avoid. And I think it comes out of a more imperial understanding of humanity. It's just like, okay, we can't have valleys here in this province where people just go around and kill each other all the time. So we take all the young men out of there, put them in an army somewhere and invade, and then we teach them a religion where you just don't do that, and there's a way out. And that's why we put a confession booth in the church we built here. So it's not just a ritual place where you repeat the same thing over and over again. With the nomatological approach to reality, it's just repetition of the same over and over again. The same rituals with the same ending. And this is where I think the pagan lynch mobs come in, and the cleansing of the community by putting, all the karma onto one body and then get rid of that body, and somehow you're cleansed for the next year or so.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have to repeat it all over again the next year. That was the problem with that model. When we had growing populations and we became settled and we started storing information, this just got more and more destructive and worse and worse. And there had to be a way out of it. And Zoroaster presented one version of it. Obviously, there are other ways of trying to deal with that. I think all the major religions do deal with that. They deal with how are we going to distribute wealth and create less source of envy, and just avoid envy because it causes so much destruction. Cain and Abel is the oldest book in the Old Testament for a good reason.
Yep.
This is what happens. This is what happened. You go and kill your brother because you envy him. Just don't envy. How do you avoid envy? Well, it's both your own personal journeys to avoid envy, but also we need to create a community where this just won't happen.
There's also the notion of loving the stranger, which you've brought up a few times. Like the Samaritan who lifts the guy from the ditch or whatever, who's not a part of his tribe. He kind of he breaks that pattern as well. Like
but in Zoroastrianism, the way you solve it is you tolerate other religions. You basically see the different fields, the different levels. So you have one level.
Eventology was saying that this was very problematic. Actually, like this was a problematic notion of Christianity when it became sort of institutionalized.
We can return to that, but let me just go back to our since this is older, right? What they do is that you have one level which we call abstract religion. Abstract religion is the religion of the priests and the military and all those guys, and it's specific, and it's often abstract in the sense you can worship completely ignorant God who doesn't care about us, whatever. If that's the truth, that's the truth. You just go and search for the truth. Mysterian cults always did that, right? The occult always did that. They went beyond the barred absolute to do that, and they made that pursuit, and it wasn't meant for the public. That's why those religions were never written down. But that created two different fields. Where the other one was folk religion, which we call iconology. So you go to the lesser gods and you worship your Elvis Presley or Ganesh or whatever, and you can relate to them because you can talk to them like an older brother or a father figure or a mother figure or something like that. In Christianity, that's praying to the Virgin Mary so she can talk to God, right? So, or the saints. And those are the lesser gods. And that's why you have two different levels of the religion. And therefore, you can have tolerance. And if you can have tolerance, hey, you can love the stranger. He doesn't have to share your faith. Your faith is not on your forehead. You just run into each other in the city. You live in your blocks, your quarters with your religion. He lives in his block over there with his religion. And all the major trade cities along the trade routes were constructed like that. From Xi'an in China all the way to Cairo, that all these Jewish quarters and Persian quarters and whatever, Afghan quarters and Turkish quarters, where minorities lived and they practiced a different religion. It was completely accepted. He was even endorsed, right? So I think loving a stranger actually starts with creating a container within which you can do that. Christianity just makes it a moral imperative.
I think if you're pagan, you can't love the stranger, right? Because you're completely bound to your tribe, right?
Of course, yes.
So you're not going to help the guy out of the ditch who's not like you. You can only surround yourself with people who are
if you're nomadic, that's necessary. There's no space for
this is how it was.
Your Lebensraum is where can you find food to eat? You run into another tribe, you kill them. I mean, it was constant warfare because anybody from a different tribe than yours, you would kill them. Yes, that's how we lived as long as we were nomadic. The total population of the nomadic world was never more than 3 million on the entire planet.
But the Roman Empire had a lot of different cultures, a lot of different religions, and it was utterly pagan. So I think that you can have pagan societies or pagan religions that can deal with the stranger, but it just comes at the cost of regularly killing scapegoats.
Yeah, but the Roman Empire inherited its structure from the Persians. The Persians were about 600 years before the Roman Empire. So yeah, they mimicked each other.
Yeah, but pagan religion works fine, right? I mean, it's not as if it doesn't work. I mean, this thing works very well. It's just very brutal. I mean, because you regularly are going to kill people. That's built into the religion. So instead of letting the victimage mechanism run rampant, you're going to organize it. That's what the Nazis tried to do, right? The Nazis tried to bring back organized paganism.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And basically, it could have worked because the Roman Empire was also organized paganism. They just killed a lot of people. Like if you want to pacify the community, if you have problems in the community, then you just kill people. And they made that work for a long time. So it's not impossible to make it work. It's just that at some point, Christianity kind of came up with the idea that there's something better. And I guess Zoroastrianism also did that you can organize a society that doesn't rely on these regular bloodbaths. But of course, now we are in a very interesting situation where Christianity has kind of, to a certain extent, run its course, right? So now we're in these apocalyptic times where we got rid of paganism. Paganism doesn't work anymore. Well, there are some mobs out there, but nobody really buys into it, right? I mean, it's like niches here and there. This is not causing an entire society to find. This doesn't calm down an entire society anymore, right? So
we don't know that yet, but yeah, okay.
Well, it's become a kind of form of entertainment on some level, I think.
We can have the interject that is hijacked by a dictator. That's of course always a possibility, right?
Yeah.
But even that will not last long. That will end with a war that ends us all, or it will disappear again, just like the Nazis disappeared. It's just not workable. It's not working anymore. That ended that train left 2,000 years ago. You cannot. I don't think it's possible to actually have a.
Oh, you had Stalin for 30 years. You had Mao in China for 30 years, and you had Pol Pot in Cambodia for a couple of years.
They aren't successful societies that people look up to with great economic wealth and stuff like that. I mean, they're kind of like a bit like, well, these are failed attempts to create order, right?
Yeah, I would say though that the only reason why the woke culture today isn't more successful because the woke people haven't realized they're fighting a symbolic war rather than a physical actual war. But when they realize that, they could take weapons into their hands and quickly shift. That's why I think it's dangerous today. I think people are getting killed now in America, and that is because some of these guys, especially the Antifa guys, and certainly some of the Black Lives Matter guys already, and the Patriot Prayer guys, on the other hand, probably have realized that no, wait a second, we gain by picking up real weapons and killing each other for real, which is probably what we wanted all along. What the woke people haven't realized is that when they go into symbolic warfare, they attack people like me, for example, in Scandinavia. I just returned the favor, and my YouTube audiences go up. But once you realize that this was actually your social biological programming, doesn't say this should be symbolic. It should be physical and actual. Then they will go after people. Hey, where were we?
Yeah, where were we? Thomas is looking up something.
Yeah, because I actually feel a bit. I was rambling when you asked me about this Paglia stuff, and so I looked it up now. It's this book called René Girard's Mimetic Theory by Wolfgang Pahlaver, which is a very nice summary of Girard, and actually also talks about a lot of other thinkers. And he writes, so despite the proximity of Paglia and Girard with respect to the relationship of sexuality and violence, however, the difference between these two thinkers is important for an understanding of the mimetic theory. Paglia completely avoids the mimetic cause of violence in the sexual realm, arguing instead that the connection of the two phenomena is a natural constant. Sexuality and violence, she says, are intrinsically connected and therefore necessarily problematic. So, and I agree with Girard here, and not Paglia. So Paglia, I mean, of course, these two do think the sexuality is less inherently problematic than people claim. And this is an eternal beef that I have with Christians who are obsessed with turning sexuality into an inherent problem, and not seeing that it's not sexuality as sexuality that is the problem, but it's the envy and the jealousy that is associated with sexuality that is not skillful. I think that would be the precise formulation.
Okay, great.
But it's kind of rare, isn't it, to find sexuality that isn't, No,
I mean, that's the thing is that I mean, people need to be skilled in sexuality. You need to.
Yeah.
And it's getting more and more problematic to do that in our society because we're getting more and more Puritan. That means that people get more and more unskilled in sexuality, and they will get in more and more trouble. So it's kind of like a vicious circle, right? Mm-hmm. So So more Puritanism, less education, and less skill, and more problems. So, and that leads to more Puritanism. So we're kind of in a very interesting spiral.
I agree on this one. That means we haven't gone pagan about sexuality at all. We've gone sort of even more Christian than Christianity about it, because
Victorian almost.
No. The thing is that the 20-year-olds today, the 20-year-olds today are having tons of sex, but it's very fucked up. Right, and they have
skillful,
So what they're doing, for example, is that they have a new morality where it's like, if you're 25 and have sex with somebody 17, it's like the worst thing ever. But you can have really hardcore sadomasochistic sex and be 18 years old if your partner is 19 or something like that. It's just a whole new moralism that makes no sense at all, except that there must be some kind of morality around it. And that to me is a Christian heritage, because these kids have no idea what sexuality is. And if to be fostered to it at all, it's basically through pornography, and that's it. And pornography is not a guide towards sexuality. Pornography is just like walking into Disneyland and think it's a university. It isn't. It's Disneyland, right? But it's not a university. You don't learn anything through pornography at all. You just mimic. You just mimic whatever it happens there.
So I guess we're agreed that the only real place. Andrew, let me finish.
You're way louder. You can take it again, but you're way louder than we are now. So is that okay for you?
The volume is louder?
You are way louder than we are. I don't know.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Want to even it out? Then your turn. Perfect. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say that I think we're all agreed that the tantric sexuality is perhaps the only proper route here. But that's all I wanted to say. In terms of healthy sexuality, what else is there?
BDSM.
What?
I mean, I always think of BDSM as Western Tantra.
Well, sure, yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of know-how there. I mean, it's like an amazing community with a lot of know-how.
And I agree. And we went to the European Men's Gathering last weekend, and we all know the first rule in these gatherings is that fix your damn sex life, otherwise your brothers can't trust you. It's like the number one rule, and it can be done, and it's done by almost all of them. So it must not be problematic. So we're looking at a trade-off here between East and West. If we're looking at the overall conversation tonight. We still haven't gotten to how East tries to solve the problem between karma and forgiveness, which the West, or the Middle East and the West, did better, right? The problem, though, with the West is that it arrived with a problem with sexuality here, where Pagan versus Girard clearly shows, and Girard is right about that. The problem wasn't sexuality itself. Sexuality is ambivalent, correct, but so is subjectivity, so is science. So that doesn't have to be a problem at all. The problem with sexuality is not. I put sexuality and violence into the category of pathos, and I think pathic narrative is completely underrated in our society today. That's that sexuality and violence pops up in all the wrong places, and that's getting increasingly problematic. That's where Pagan is onto something, and I completely agree with that. Obviously, with the pathos needing to be there next to the logos and the mythos. But in the East, when you go back to the East, and this is my experience from both Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, is that none of them have a major problem with sexuality.
Yeah.
Those three religions, because they have tantric traditions, have solved their problems. When I became a Zoroastrian, converted early 1990s, and I started hanging out with Zoroastrians from America and India and Europe, alike, it was just like, you get married because you actually unify two different families. So there's like two clans get together, and the way to tie them together is a marriage. And that's like a company you're running together, which is actually why they have a very low divorce rate. Because actually man and woman should meet and say, let's run a corporation together and call it a family. That's a very good idea of a family. So they do that, right? And they have larger, more extended families that are actually valid and they hold. So they have a very low divorce rate. Brilliant. Now, the trick is then, what do you do with your sexuality? And they just looked at me just like, well, who you sleep with is a totally different story. However you execute your sexuality and you use that energy, obviously a very small part of it is going to be for reproductive purposes, which means your husband or your wife is not that interested. Now, there might be Parsis and Zoroastrians out there who disagree with me in public about this, but they would certainly in private agree, because this is how they live. Also, I don't find a major problem with sexuality in Israel. I think Israelis or Jews in general are much more relaxed about sexuality than Christians and Muslims are.
Yeah.
So that's not a major problem here. The problem is when we approach Islam and Christianity, the pop religions of the West, is that suddenly sexuality itself is seen as the problem.
I wonder if it's because there isn't a strong matriarchal culture. Like there's not women involved somehow in in dealing with sexuality. Like this was something I got from Paglia too, since we're speaking of her. She mentioned, in the East you have tantric women teachers.
Yeah, but it's not like feminism has helped us, has it?
Well, no, it's not feminism. It's tradition, right? It's like there is a tradition of a different kind of female, right, than Mother Mary and than this soft kind of female.
Well, I would agree, because then if Islam is the worst case here, then certainly if you lock up women behind hijabs and things and lock them up in a house, and you have to fuck each other as men before you're allowed to fuck women, and when you do, you might rape them. Gets worse, right? So, but Pagan wasn't nice either. Like yeah, it's nasty. But again, if you create larger gatherings, the social becomes larger forms than clan or tribe. In clan and tribe, you can contain sexuality per se. Then if you have larger communities, you need prohibitions. And these prohibitions are ultimately not about controlling sexuality, because that's just creating pressure cookers, so anybody would know. It's rather about, letting it out somewhere and then use it for constructive purposes. And the way you do that is you avoid making it a topic of end.
Mm-hmm. And
but return to the
education and sexuality.
The weakness of the East in all of this is that maybe they didn't solve sexuality better than the West did, but you still got the problem with karma. And this is an acute problem in India, where I work a lot these days, because in India, they are now mimicking the West on a massive scale, and they have all the programmers and the coders of the world, and they have now a huge, huge industry employing tens of millions of people who basically do all the programming and the coding, on computers for the rest of the world. Now, that's a massive industry in India. It creates very little value, though, because this is low paid. This is like the factories of our age, right? Mm-hmm. So the problem then is, how can India become more competitive by becoming more entrepreneurial? And here is a problem. You can, in some Indian cults and some minority religions like Jainism and Zoroastrianism, find a lot of entrepreneurship, but it's very specialized and gilded. The problem is Indian society doesn't, in general, have an entrepreneurial spirit to it. Indians go to America and then they become bosses of big companies. They do not necessarily innovate. They're just brilliant at mimicking. But the problem with Indian culture is that because it's tied to karma, it's incredibly hard for an Indian to be allowed to make mistakes. Mm-hmm. I would say this is still the pagan part.
So it's an unforgiving notion of karma again.
I think the brilliance with Christianity, where it was properly practiced, especially in Southern Europe, where capitalism started, was that this is the root of capitalism. This is the brilliance of capitalism. And capitalism started with the bazaars along the Silk Route. Mm-hmm. What was so great about the Silk Route and the bazaars? Was it just the trade? No, it was also the production. And the production went on all along the Silk Route, and goods were transported back and forth along the Silk Route. How did that happen? It was entrepreneurial. So you learned from your master, but you could also add innovation. So you could develop the products and make them better and better and improve on them all the time. And to me, this is the central social value of forgiveness. It's not about mercy being nice to people. It's really about implementing an idea that you can actually create, say, an engineering culture, an architectural culture. You could innovate and be entrepreneurial in a culture if you add tons of forgiveness to the system.
Yeah, that might be right. I remember like the Tibetans never invented anything other than butter tea, right? They had this very, very complex, deep spirituality, but they don't have any entrepreneurial aspect at all.
But still, I suspect that Buddhism calmed down the lynch mobs in the East. So why wouldn't Buddhism then have some kind of entrepreneurial aspect to it? Where would entrepreneurship come from in China? Is it Buddhism, Confucianism, or Taoism?
Probably Taoism.
What's your guess?
I don't know. Probably a mix of Buddhism and Taoism. It wouldn't be Confucianism, would it?
We should invite a Chinese person to discuss that, because obviously there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit going in China, which communism then prevents and stops and tries to milk, but still it's happening, undeniably happening. The Chinese are inventing. They have an inventing culture. Japan has an innovative culture. They have Shintoism and Buddhism as the two main religions. Korea has an innovative culture. It has Buddhism again. Yeah. So, it's influenced by Zoroastrianism. I've argued that Zen and Zion and Shan in China are essentially trade route religion. So that means there's Zoroastrian, Taoism, and Buddhism.
Well, they're iconoclastic as well, right? You know, you can kill the Buddha. There's this expression: if you meet the Buddha, kill the Buddha. And there's a sort of you can break something and then do it again. Probably, maybe that's part of it. There is a lot. I think there is a big aspect of repentance in that culture, and you do think.
Well, wait. I make a difference between forgiveness and repentance.
Okay, what's the difference?
Repentance is that you stand before a perfect God and you've proven to be imperfect. So you've done something that's been imperfect. So you ask for repentance, meaning you're forgiven for that specific act. So you can go back into the perfect realm. There's no learning involved. Mm-hmm. If you do repentance, that's Islam, and that's the problem with Islam. Islam is strictly a repentance culture. It means that you did bad, and if you don't excuse yourself for doing bad, you'll get killed now, but then you might get a second chance. But there's really no learning going on because you stand before perfection. If you stand before perfection, that's just repentance. That is the difference between repentance and forgiveness that I find incredibly important here. Because you cannot create a thriving entrepreneurial culture on a religion that only allows for repentance. But if religion allows for forgiveness and puts forgiveness at the center, you eliminate two problems. One, you go innovative. And two, you avoid the lynch mob. Because
on this, what do you think, Thomas? Would you have any?
I think this is very good. Yeah. So basically, so turn the other cheek is a mechanism to avoid escalation. So that's one thing. And then, but the other thing, as what Alexander points out, is also that you need to be able to, you can fail and then learn from your mistakes and try again. So these are kind of two aspects of forgiveness. So you avoid escalation and you enter a learning process. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the scapegoat cannot be scapegoated without problems, at least if the scapegoat can be forgiven, because the scapegoat has done certain things. That means you got to go pagan to kill the scapegoat. You can't stay within the Christian realm. So even if you got a Christian lynch mob, say, going after the Jew, you're absolutely correct to say they stop being Christians when they start doing the pogroms to kill the Jews, because that's not Christian at all.
I see paganism in Christianity everywhere now. After reading Girard, it's also such a relief, right? Because now I can say, like, well, the aspects of Christianity that I always disliked, these are pagan aspects, and the aspects of Christianity I always thought, like, well, this makes a lot of sense. These are actually, as far as I can understand now, these are actually the very old aspects of Christianity that turned Christianity into a success. Like, for example, the deeply problematic aspects, like the witch burnings and pogroms against the Jews and stuff like that. That's all just Christians going total pagan. Mm. It's quite fascinating. I mean, you see a lot of opinions now. A lot of people who consider themselves very, very Christian. They're not Christian at all. They're pagans. For example, also Christians who judge other religions. They're not. This is not a Christian thing to do.
Well, they got a problem we discussed before, and that's the elimination of the barred absolute. So the barred absolute is there, and it's foundational for Zoroastrianism and Judaism, doubtlessly so. I mean, it's just there's something behind the barred absolute you must not go behind, because if the barred absolute is removed, there's nothing prevents you from looking straight into the eyes of God, right? And right. Protestantism played this fully. Luther played this fully. This is like Luther and Calvin. It's like the direct relationship to God makes Christianity unique. Nobody else allows you to talk directly to God. Well, but actually, that is alien. That is alien to people. The barred absolute, there has to be something between humans and God. And the priesthood has to make sure that door is locked. And that is key to Zoroastrianism, Judaism. And it's precisely how you avoid a mass religion to go pagan. I think paganism could sneak into Christianity and certainly into Islam, the back door, because these religions had no barred absolute. And if you don't have a barred absolute, paganism can come back in. Because if you have a direct access to God, then God is also reflected in your direct actions. That means your pagan instincts can be completely divine.
Because you know the will of God. People who do not follow the will of God, they can be scapegoated. Is that your
Yes, exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So the root of fundamentalism, which is unique to Christianity and Islam, it doesn't make any sense to have fundamentalism in Buddhism and Zoroastrian Judaism, because these are complex religions that basically say you don't know shit anyway, right? It's a long path to learn. And by the way, there's a barred absolute at the end you need to pass through. It's called enlightenment in Buddhism, and it's really, really hard to get there, right? And at least it's Tantra and Sutra in Buddhist teachings too. Zoroastrianism has the same thing. It has a definite barred absolute you must not go beyond. The priests even have their own religion, which is separate from yours. You're taught a religion that works for you. It's about your Asha. So this religion you're being taught, it will work. That's Zoroastrianism. It's called Mazdaism. And the separate from Mazdaism is Zoroastrianism. So they're separated. In Judaism, this is clearly the case too. What the Jews find so disgraceful about Christ dying on the cross, not that he died on the cross, and they might even have made a mistake. He might have been a good man, and maybe he could even teach them a lesson about scapegoating. They like that. But what the Jews found problematic about Christ on the cross, the way it's described in the Bible, is that the curtain fell down in the temple. And there was direct access to the innermost sacred room for anybody and everybody to see. This is today, when we see today's society with transparency and the demand for everything to be seen and people opening up their homes and everything, what I call pornoflation with Jan in our books. We call it the pornoflated society. It's constant need to have everything opened up for everybody to see. That comes from a terrible mistake in Christianity and Islam. And this is the idea that everything should be open up for everybody to see because we have the divine right to see absolutely everything and see straight into the ass of God if you want to. And this opens the door so that when paganism then comes back with a vengeance, it comes back aggressively in these cultures. This is cursed Islam and Christianity all along. And that is the price they paid for being pop religions. They made religion easy. They packaged themselves to sell it to the masses.
I disagree. I think that you are being way too harsh on both Christianity and Islam. I think that, Islam has been around for a long time. If you've seen a building like the Alhambra, right? You can see like what incredible, beautiful things Islam can accomplish. So I think that all religions will have a non-functional pop part that is like completely, kind of a perversion. And then they will have a core that is kind of like, this is the stuff that actually makes it work. And I think it's very interesting to look at religions like that. So
I would gladly take you to the gardens of Yazd in Iran. You see the Alhambra is mimicked from. It wasn't from a Muslim heritage at all. So no, I disagree that Islam really has contributed as much as being claimed. Because it's been a world religion for 1,400 years.
Actually, I'm kind of like more proposing a research project because, Girard has done very little with respect to other religions. He wrote one book about Brahmanism, I believe, but I haven't read it yet. It's on my to-do list. But he hasn't really, he limited himself very much to Christianity. I think that the Girardian project should look at other religions like Buddhism, Sutric and Tantric Buddhism, at Islam, and basically see like how do these religions work and why did they stick around so long? Because most religions, they just come up and they disappear, right? Yeah. But why are these religions successful? So what made them most functional and what makes them dysfunctional? I think these are very interesting questions.
Most of Buddhism is probably pop religion too. People believe in the Pure Land and they're going to go to the Pure Land. It's very, very pop religion. Most of it, I would say, probably.
But that's the.
And I think there's a function of that. I think there's a function. There needs to be.
Yeah, but that's the folk religion version of it. Don't mistake that for the proper religion in this case.
Well, there's a billion Buddhists, and most of them are sort of.
There's people will always turn it into something that works and which works at a very superficial level, right? It's always going to happen. That happens with Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity.
Yeah, but don't flatten it out here. We must be able to criticize certain religions for certain basic tenets they believe in. They are different, after all. Mm-hmm. And I think Islam was popular because it was simplistic. And that has been its curse ever since. And the really simplistic religions, if we're going to simplistic religions, we have a reversed order of the Silk Road tribe that we, of course, admire. We love Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. That's what Söderqvist and I are really, grounded now. But the other version of that is the Disney World triad. The Disney World triad of Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and Scientologists. So as you can see, religion has gone on a downward slope the last 5,000 years, yet with the most vulgar, silliest versions of it in America in the last 100 years. So, the Disney World triad is interesting for a comparative study with Buddhism and Taoism and Zoroastrianism. Mm-hmm. What really happens when you go pop culture in terms of religion? Scientology is just hysterical in that sense. It's just you pay your way to go to different planets. Yeah, but it's fascinating actually that religion can go that far and get that silly. And you can't compare those religions with the rich traditions we're talking about here.
What about the Catholic Church, for example? Is that a pop religion, or I mean, most of it, or?
There's a folk religion element. That's why you added the saints. And that was smart. That's what Catholicism will survive Protestantism. Protestantism is dying. Catholicism will still be around for a long time to come. And simply because it allows for a folk religion, which you can talk to the saints, and the saints will then talk to God. They reinstated the Bard Absolute in a very clever way. And
that's an interesting interesting thought. But then you're actually
reinstated.
I mean, this is basically what I pointed out, right? So that you will have like let's say pop religion, and then you will have something like, let's say, something that is a bit less, a bit more refined. So and I guess it's the same. It's like that with all religions, right? So then you would kind of expect that a certain religion has a core that is kind of, to some extent, integrated and valuable, and then a lot of stuff on top of that you could call pop religion.
Yeah, you have the same thing in Islam. You have Sufism that came along the Silk Route, and it's essentially Zoroastrian and Buddhist teachings developed under an Islamic umbrella. And of course, it's the most interesting part, artistically, theologically, anything you like within Islam is Sufism. And there's very little Islam in it, to be honest about it. It's just So Catholicism, realized we need a Bard Absolute. Okay, so have martyrs who then become saints. They're not scapegoats because scapegoating ended with Christ. No, they're models, role models. So you can actually talk to them. And because they live these fulfilling and rich lives, the church, in communication with God, has decided we can turn these into role models or forefathers or foremothers that you can actually pray to. So you don't have just Virgin Mary here. You all of a sudden have all these saints you can pray to. That's a much richer religion than Protestantism, that then comes much later and says that, we're going to print the Bible, because to print the Bible in your local language, you'll have direct access to God, so you can remove all the saints and clean out all the churches and make them in a list. And it's just a book that's printed and you read it.
Has looked at that. So there's Karl Barth, which probably, considered one of the greatest theologians of the 20th century. And one of the things that he pointed out is that, there's no God behind Jesus. So he was aware of this problem, I think, and he solved it by saying, often Christians think of, you have Jesus and then God is behind that, right? Something in the sky that looks down. And he points out, Jesus is the only thing you have. There's no God behind Jesus. You can't decouple it. And that is a very interesting thought.
Yeah, it's the Zoroastrian Mazda and Ahura, but they're both primordial in Zoroastrianism. They're not personified.
That's kind of like why Zizek would say that, be a Christian atheist of some kind. If there's no God behind Jesus, then there's just man, right?
It seems that I ended up somewhere along that path, yes.
Yeah, it's a kind of the escape what the theologians did in the 20th century. But anyway, back to orthodoxy. And orthodoxy gets into the same problem. The way to try to solve is by going monist. So Neoplatonism is dominated in Orthodox theology. And that's, if you convert to Orthodox Christianity, it's probably because you have a monist worldview. You don't buy into the Platonist dualism. It's the Neoplatonists that shaped orthodoxy, and that was a major shift for them. That's how they tried to solve the Bard Absolute, because the Bard Absolute is automatically reinstated if you go for a monist worldview. It's the price you pay for monism.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Okay, so if you go for dualism, your soul can be free from your body. Your soul can then be perceived as being divine, and that allows for the Bard Absolute to be removed. That's what all Gnostics are trying all the time. They realize they cannot become divine in a human body, so they hate the body, consider their own spirit to be superior to the body, and suddenly it's even superior to anything else, and suddenly it's divine. So Gnostics tend to be very self-preoccupied narcissists, usually pillar saints, who think of themselves being superior to others, and they're usually very envious of other people's sex lives. Okay, that's the problem with Gnostics. Zoroastrians knew it, and they just wanted to get rid of them. They weren't even heretics. They were just like trash. It's just like, get them out of the way. Like Marx would consider the lumpen proletariat. Just, they're out of the way. They're destroying our revolution. Get them out of the way. So they were the Gnostics. And Gnosticism stayed because of dualism, and the radical dualism. Of course, separation of body mind means that all of the world is then dual, means it's not unified. It's not connected. It's evil and good or whatever. That can't be unified at all. Your body and your mind cannot be unified. and you have to pick one of them. And then if you go for the mind, you get rid of the body, and then you start hating sexuality. And in through the door, you got the problem with sexuality Christianity created, because it accepted dualism. Now, in monism, you don't accept that. Everything is tied to everything else. But you can allow as many attributes as you like. So, for example, God can have different faces and still be one God.
Yeah.
You have Elohim in Judaism. Elohim is a pluralist. You don't say Eloah, you say Elohim. Yeah, you say gods for God, meaning you got Yahweh and you got El and you got Adonai, and they're separated. And the same thing as Zoroastrianism. You separate Master and Ura. They're not separate gods. They're just different names for God. They're usually used separately, because Aura is being and Master is mind. And because mind is within being and being is within mind in Zoroastrianism, they're in parallel with one another, and they together are the divine. So you look up to the divine and try to model yourself accordingly. So you might have role models in between, say Mobids or Shahs or military leaders, or whatever you look up to, your mentor or your father or your mother, whatever. You look up to other role models in your life and you try to mimic them to be as they are and grow up. And you have a divine ideal that then grown-ups look up to, and then grown-ups become models for children. So you got a chain here of things you should mimic. That's how they solve the problem of mimetic desire. So that's Zoroastrian's version of that. And you can do that within a monist universe. But then the Bard Absolute comes in, because for the child, the grown-ups are a Bard Absolute. You're literally 3 years old when you're 3. You're not 30. When you're 30 years old, you're literally not 90. You cannot be an elder when you're 30 years old. You're probably in the middle of your reproductive phase. You work hard, you have kids, right? You can then become an elder. What do the elders do? The elders look up to, assumed, look up to the priesthood, and the priesthood then look up to the divine. So there's always somebody you look up to who you're not yet at. And you take this is Zoroastrianism all the way to your death. And when you die, you strive for a meritat, which is transcendence, but you reach Horvatat, which is fullness. So you reach fullness and you die, you can go to peace and you can die, because a meritat will then be your heritage. So whatever you created during your life will then be inherited and used by others to create an even better world, which is Zoroastrianism's unique point. And this idea of Frashokereti, the ever-improving world, is central to Zoroastrianism. You can only do that with the Bard Absolute. You have several Bard Absolutes on the way. But if you remove them, like Islamic Christianity did, there's not even a difference between a child and a god. There's no coincidence that you have child gods and godchildren in these religions. They do not exist in Judaism. They do not exist in Buddhism. They do not exist in Zoroastrianism. The idea that God can be a child and a child can be God is actually what I would say is Islam and Christianity's problem. So you get Allah, who is a boy, who's a god, and in Christianity you get the boy who's born with wisdom. So this is the critical question in Christianity. You get the boy in the cradle. He's apparently God, so he must be perfect, and he must have ultimate wisdom. He's never lived a life. How can you have ultimate wisdom if he hasn't lived a life? And that's, of course, why he goes all the way to the cross. You don't ever hear about his sex life. Because if he had a sex life, he would be perfect. So he starts with a mother next to him in the cradle, and he ends up on the cross next to his mother, and it's essentially a boy, Pharaoh, all the way.
No, I don't really agree with that. I mean, the whole point of Christ is just to expose the victimage mechanism. That's it. I mean, in that sense, Christ isn't really. I mean, he's an example in the sense that that he avoids mimetic escalation and things like that. But I mean, you can't just take Christ as a role model. It's
No. I'm not saying role model. I'm saying that the problem is a religion where boy and God are the same thing. If you remove the Bard Absolute, that's what you get, because the Bard Absolutes that we go through in life are the things we cannot yet be, but that we strive towards. That is the point with Tantra too. Sutra is there to strive towards Tantra, but you can stay in Sutra and be a reasonable citizen in a society. And you can just find out that Tantra is too hard for you to stomach. Then don't go there. You're allowed to stay within the sutra and be perfectly okay. Actually, if you go into the tantric mode and you weren't prepared for it, and you went in there anyway, you fuck up yourself miserably and become a drug abuser and all kinds of things. Yeah, that's exactly the point with the Bard Absolute. That's why Buddhism has it. Your religion has it. My religion has it. Judaism has it. The problem was that Islam and Christianity removed it to turn themselves into pop religions. And the really absurd versions of that, the Disney World tried in America, have no idea what a barred absolute even is. Oh. That is problematic. The prohibition that religion teaches to contain human desire starts with the barred absolute. Yeah. Without it, you run into problems all along.
Well, in Zen, there's gradual enlightenment and sudden enlightenment. And gradual enlightenment is step by step. Right.
But
then there's also this kind of absolute too. There's a sudden enlightenment. So it's almost like both are contained. Both views are contained.
So you would say that you could be like a savior person if you're young in Buddhism also.
I'll give you another example. In Judaism, you have the secret Torah and you have the oral Torah. The oral Torah is what Moses gave the Jews with all these rules that they have to follow. And that was a punishment because they weren't ready for the secret. They weren't ready to get the Holy Spirit directly. They weren't ready for that. So actually the Torah, the oral Torah is a punishment was a punishment from God, apparently. Whereas the real thing is the secret Torah, not the secret Torah, just the oral Torah, the direct realization, right?
I see this everywhere. I see this everywhere.
Direct, past the barred absolute, there are no stages and rules and there's no sutra anymore, and that's when you meet that. But you're right. Yeah, you have to be prepared for that. No,
there's no sutra in your life, but you need to teach sutra to others. That's when you become a real leader,
sure,
or a priest.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's why the Jewish religion is there.
I find this fascinating because the natural reaction today, especially among young, smart men, and we have quite a few of them around us in the intellectual deep web and other places, is that they all go for alchemy and they want to invent sort of an intelligent, credible, real version of chaos magic and things like that right now. They're really going towards Freemasonry and orders again. That is the barred absolute in sort of civil life. That's the civil West. It's just like you would go into those orders because if religion was too childish and forgave you for anything you did, you could at least go into these orders, which then became part of religion. And I think they were, again, invented to sort of back up the lack for barred absolutes within Christianity. And that's why Freemasonry, for example, which is the beauty of the United States of America, is the Constitution was created by Freemasons. They did fantastic things, and they were very inspired by Persians through the French. And I love these traditions because I think it's very healthy that the reaction from guys who go anti-woke after they're tired of being anti and they want to be active rather than reactive is that Patrick Ryan does this, Daniel Fraga does this, Owen Cox does it. All these guys, they're really sincerely interested in alchemy and chaos magic, but not from the point of like, I'm a teenager trying to find my identity. This is a cool thing to do. You go into Satanist death cults or whatever. I'll listen to heavy metal. No. They are serious about this. They're serious about rewriting the history of the alchemists. And I find that interesting. It is the rediscovery of the barred absolute and how incredibly important it is for culture. Mm-hmm. And maybe we're finally then waking up to what I'm really going towards here, which is what I call the adultification of religion and the adultification of the West.
Yeah.
The principle of exploitation has to be replaced by the principle of imploitation. We have to preach equitopianism. We have to preach cosmopolitanism. We also have to preach the Tower of God, which that there are certain things you cannot achieve in your life. You will have to die before those things can be achieved. Maybe your children will. Okay, that is the barred absolute in its absolute form. And we call it the Tower of God in our work, next to the Garden of God and the City of God. But I think that these ideas are coming back. They're all built on the idea that if you don't reinstate the barred absolute here dramatically, and this is, of course, teaching tantra philosophically to the West, there is no way the West can achieve any of this. I mean, the direct access society, the shortcut society, the quick fix society, all these pathologies we see today that I'm going to have it and I'm going to have it now, that the commercialism, brought in, that if I want this, I can have it. No, you can't. Actually, you probably never can have it. Even if you try, you won't have it.
Yeah, and what if you did meet God directly? Like,
isn't that the ultimate religious prohibition that's needed today? It's to stop this pornoflation and the mass narcissism and the woke culture and all that. Is to go back and say, no, you will not have any of these things, or at least very few of them, and only if they fit your archetypes, you can serve the community by having them. And it's going to take you years and years to get it. This is the Bard Absolute. I think it's absolutely key. It's the end chapter of our book. We tie it to the Dark Renaissance and the return of the Bard Absolute. But we're going to end the book on that note. And we're not going to end the book with forgiveness. We're not going to end up with some sort of syrupy ending saying, yeah, Nelson Mandela's going to come along and save us or anything like that at all. I think that's exactly the wrong message today. Absolutely
Jesus is here, wrong. So don't worry about it.
No, not at all. The Saoshyant can be a machine, but if the Saoshyant is the machine in a collaboration with some humans, certainly not all of them, then that collaboration does not give the right for all humanity to pass through to the next stage. I don't think the Exodus is at all for the masses. I think the Exodus is for a small elite and a few machines, to be honest. And I think that's the brutal truth we need to teach. You know, you got to call the new book The Exodology. I honor you for that purpose, for that suggestion, but it's going to be called Process and Event because of the book. But the overall trilogy will be called The Exodology. I'm going to talk to you on about it, but I think Syntheism, Digital Libido, and Process and Event together, all three of them are the Exodology. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good overall title for sure. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
But forgiveness has to be in here. I'm getting the Zoroastrian version of it. I think I can get the Jewish version of it. I'm interested in the Christian version of it, not because I subscribe to it. I think it's a bit of a cheap shot. I think Nietzsche's critique of it was relevant, but it has worked. It has worked wonderfully. It is why Christianity is being imported in Korea and China at the moment. It's only because it's associated with prosperity and success. So if Buddhism didn't provide enough innovation energy to the Chinese and the Koreans and the Taiwanese, they're certainly now on a massive scale importing Christianity, the vulgar Protestant American version of it. So what? It's all about try and try again. And Americans do try and they fail and they try again.
Interesting.
At least before they became woke.
Yeah.
So it's essential to the heroic that I've been talking about for years. I've never talked about the heroic being tied to forgiveness, but I absolutely now see the connection. And I'm still interested in Buddhism must have worked a lot with this compared to Hinduism and Asian paganism. So I'm interested in how Buddhism solved that problem, how you get out of the karma circle, not too cheaply. That was Nietzsche's point. His criticism of Christianity was not that you couldn't get out of the circle. It was rather that you got out too cheaply.
Again, the whole point is to get out of the circle. And in Buddhism, that's the entire point, is to get out of the wheel of karma.
But that's your next life and the next life and the next life? Or can we get rid of reincarnation here and say that Buddhism doesn't really preach reincarnation?
Oh, it doesn't. You don't need reincarnation is irrelevant to that. You're trying to wake up, out of the karmas.
But you're going to save yourself in that sense. You must forgive yourself. Well, how does it work? I'm just fascinated with, because obviously it has at least partly solved this problem, because there's less lynch mobbing in the culture, which to me is evidence that somehow there's a forgiveness mechanism working. Because I think the forgiveness mechanism is what ultimately de-instrumentalizes the lynch mob. It's just, they hate when you say there's forgiveness, because if you allow forgiveness, they can't kill the bait.
Yeah. Well, if you...
at least they can't kill the bait without being guilty for it. And they don't want the guilt. They don't want the guilt, they don't want the shame. They're terrified of that. The lynch mob wants to be anobjective, collectively go after the scapegoat, and that's why they all throw rocks at the same time, so none of them is guilty of killing the scapegoat. Oh, it just died, right? And it died, and there was release from tension. But what gets hard to do is not only if the savior is standing there saying that you must not kill the scapegoat, because you will repeat that all over and over again next time it's your turn. No, this is not an ethical scapegoat in Christianity. The Christian savior is not only a defender of the scapegoat in that sense. The Christian savior says, those of you who have no sin, you throw the first rock. That is de-weaponizing.
Or Buddha sees Mara and sees that it's his own face or something like that. Mara's the devil or whatever. Buddha meets Mara and sees the own face. Maybe that's something. Maybe that's
you have
corny.
the 6 realms teachings, right?
What's that?
So the 6 realms.
Those are the teachings of karma. Yeah.
One of you guys is an echo onto your microphone right now. You don't want that.
Maybe me.
Okay. Yeah. Go on. Please explain to me. I love this.
6 realms. Yeah. Go ahead,
6
Thomas.
realms, right? So this is I really like this. These teachings. So the Buddhism's. So Buddhism kind of. So you can think of these 6 realms as the realms in which you can be born, right, reincarnated. But Chogyam Trungpa actually used them very much as ways of being, right? So many people who do meditation and follow these New Age teachings, that they try to get to the God realm. So that's the realm of perfect being, right? That's where you're enlightened. You're perfectly happy, and you're going to be there. So, but that's not the goal of it. That's just one of these 6 realms, and the other realms are the jealous God realm, where you this is kind of like you're very rich, but you still want to be richer. That's the jealous God realm. Then you have the hungry ghost realm, which is addictions. You have the animal realm, which is stupidity and slavery. And so in each of these realms, so these are the
hell realm is the one you're missing. Yeah.
The hell realm is the realm of
violence and war and hatred. Yeah.
And in each of these realms, so these are beings, right? You have God beings, you have hell beings, you have hungry ghost beings. But in every realm there is a Buddha, and that means that your misery or your problem or your being stuck in the God realm or in the anger of the hell realm, that's an opportunity for a Buddha to step in and help you. But you can always emerge in that realm as a Buddha. In your anger or in your stupidity, you can actually act as a Buddha. And I think that's a very, very nice teaching. And basically, it's not so much about avoiding these realms, which would be kind of the sutric approach, and the approach of Christianity, but it's about recognizing in which realm you are, and by recognizing it, you can transcend it.
Yeah. So if you're in the hell realm, it's anger realm, you transcend that to clarity. And if you're in the ignorance realm, you transcend that to sort of being very open. If you're in the hungry ghost realm, you would I don't know how you
motivation and speed.
Motivation and speed.
So you're very motivated to do stuff, and in the God realm, everything is so prosperous for you. So you're in a very good position to help other people who are not so prosperous. So in that sense, it's not so much about, because the Buddhism is not so much about escaping the cycle. It's actually accepting the cycle completely as your way of being. There is no,
but it's alchemical too. It's transforming that. You brought up alchemy, Alexander. I think that Vajrayana path is profoundly alchemical. It's about transforming those realms.
I love it. Guys, this is great. This explains a lot, because although I'm familiar with it, the way you explain it now in this context means you create a sort of very concrete microethics. Just like these are the different aspects of life. They also rhyme very well with our 3 narratives, pathos, logos, and mythos, because you have the aspects of pathos, logos, and mythos. So the stories you tell about yourself or tell about the world are either pathic or mythical or logical, or the mixes of them. So the same thing matches these six realms too. But you actually then go into sort of microethical, so you do concretely deal with these things. And that transformation you're talking about here is the shift I'm interested in, because the transformation is the goal of why you have forgiveness in Zoroastrianism. The forgiveness in Zoroastrianism is not there as a generous thing to be thrown off because you have, you're children of God and God is merciful. This is not about God looking good. It's not about virtue signaling at all. No, it's just about, you made a mistake. Listen, you got plenty of time to be a child before you become a grown-up. So why don't you try again? Okay? You try and try again, and then you finally transform and you become a grown-up in Zoroastrianism. So you stop being a child, you become a grown-up, and you take on the responsibility to go through a rite of passage. It's a similar journey you make, different steps. And again, there is a before and an after. There's a before you walk into the realm and you're confronted with all these things. You cannot avoid them, and you must be there and stay there with it until you, with the Buddha's help, or Buddha as a role model, can be transformed.
Yeah.
again, it's I don't know if prohibition is the right word the religion deals with here. It's more like fostering us. It's just like, yeah, this is the right channel. Now get in here in this channel. And in schooling, it's education. It's just like, if you do this properly here, and it's been done before by many, instead of guessing what you're going to do, then you probably arrive in the right place. Now, compare that, for example, to the idea of contemporary secular sexuality, which is just that, oh, by the way, teenagers will find out for themselves what it's like to fuck. And they'll discover it naturally. If we just close down the warhouses and close down pornography, they'll just figure it out. So let's not have to educate them or teach them about any of these things.
It's mind-bogglingly idiotic, actually.
It is mind-bogglingly idiotic, exactly. Which means they will only go to pornography and they have nowhere else to go. I thank God at least for that. Because if they didn't even have that, what would they do? Rape each other? What? Of course they get fucked up. Of course they have no idea what sexuality is. Of course they can create all kinds of weird moralities around it because they live in a sort of post-Christian world where Christianity is still around but not supposed to be there. The pagan alternatives is basically just rape and take whatever you want and leave. So, you know,
well, because they don't understand the alchemical aspect of sexuality, right?
It's again, children cannot invent a world of rules and regulations. Then we get Lord of the Flies. We left sexuality in contemporary society to the kids, and we left it to become Lord of the Flies. It's just idiotic.
Sure.
It's just idiotic. It's just horrendous. It's just, and then we put on bikinis on 2-year-olds as if the 2-year-olds must be protected from pedophiles. It's just completely deranged. It's just really, really weird. And it's going to get worse. I think woke will fight down in the next few years at least, or woke fights down itself. As long as it stays symbolic, we're happy with that and doesn't go actually violent. Okay. But, you know, if the fuck-ups that come next after that are going to stay with us for much, much longer. And it's, again, the idea that the infant can learn on their own from other infants how the world operates. 6-year-olds watching 6-year-olds watching 6-year-olds on YouTube. It's not a healthy environment at all. It's going to go really deranged before we start realizing that's not how human beings operate. They operate across generations. They learn from the older generations. That's how you learn things. I think the search for mentors is a healthy thing we see among the young guys right now in the men's movement. We embrace it because there's a lack of mentors. They go into alchemy and lodges and orders and things because that's when you meet the other guys your own age. That is essentially what a really good men's group is. If you don't find elders, find 5 other guys your own age because together you're 100 years old. You have 5 times 20 years life experience. That's not a bad start at all for a men's group. I think these reactions that are coming from the young smart kids right now are very healthy and good. That means they're going nectocratic. They're going to do fine. They're going to do well. They're going to be engineers, programmers, coders. They're going to create a technological patriarchy that eventually is going to run the world and men are going to take over again. They'll be fine.
Process, right? Some kind of process to go through rather than just this being thrown.
Process and event, may I add?
Thrown into the world with nothing and just trying to...
Process is childhood, but the move from childhood to adulthood is the event. Okay, adulthood is a process. You move from adulthood into elderhood, an event.
Oh, that's
elderhood
another...
moves into priesthood, an event, and the priest look for the divine. Okay, so these steps, the barred absolutes we're supposed to go through, say you within sutra, you're in process.
Yeah.
When you go from sutra to tantra, that's an event. Then you can move into tantra as a process. This is why we write a book called Process and Event, is to discuss and understand how you can be in a loop where you can make mistakes and you can make them all over again, and you learn from your mistakes and you get ready, and eventually, whoop, one day the event happens and you can pass on to the next.
Well, it's not that you've perfected sutra in some kind of a way, right? To get to the event that you would go into tantra, like you don't become perfect.
No, you become whole.
You don't even have to become whole. If there's an event, it's a kind of there's no perfection. There's no. No, there's no perfection. There's just
wholeness is not perfect. Completion and perfection are different words in Latin. Right. Completion means you completed that journey. It doesn't mean you're perfect at all. It's just that what you were supposed to do there, you've done it. You're through with that. You can move on to the next stage. So completion is not perfection. Remember that in Zoroastrian religion, there's completion. There is no perfection.
But we are in a very good position. We are in a very good position because we have we have a deep theoretical framework to understand Tantra and to understand Sutra, because we have Girard for Sutra, we have very precise description of desire, and then we have Nietzsche, who has the Tantric side, and they need to be united. You know, like Girard didn't quite do Nietzsche justice, and of course Nietzsche was way too, I mean, he just jumped into Tantra and rejected Sutra completely. So in a sense, we have like two incomplete geniuses, and they need to be united. So I guess that's what you're going to do in your book. On a
and we got Hegel and Whitehead on the other side for the metaphysics. So.
Yeah.
Well, those four are the giants. Those four are the giants. I agree completely. I'm willing to skip Deleuze. He doesn't fulfill the requirements. There's something lacking in him. He was brilliant when he was younger, but Deleuze just basically made a vulgar version of Whitehead for the Europeans or something, but he doesn't qualify.
I haven't studied Deleuze yet, but I have his book on Nietzsche and the Heidegger book on Nietzsche. So that's.
The Deleuze book on Nietzsche is fantastic, but it's the book on Nietzsche. That's why it's great. So you're studying Nietzsche through Heidegger and Deleuze, and study them in parallel. The books came out the same year, I think, or a year in between, written independently of each other. And the young Deleuze's version of Nietzsche and the old Heidegger's version of Nietzsche should be read comparatively next to each other. I completely understood Nietzsche after finishing that, and then I went back and read Nietzsche properly and saw the patterns clearly. That's a great way of doing it. And I think Deleuze's work in the 1960s, Difference of Repetition, The Logic of Sense, completes whatever Nietzsche hadn't written or Heidegger hadn't written before. See, that's complete Nietzscheanism. And that's where Foucault and Deleuze are Nietzscheans in a way. But what then Deleuze went into after he fucked a lot of students in Paris in the 1960s, and then he and Guattari made into these immensely overhyped books called Thousand Plateaus and Anti-Oedipus and all that. There are marginal works in the history of philosophy. They really are marginal works. And they are the works, of course, that Slavoj Žižek successfully attacks. And Adrian Johnston successfully attacks. The American version of Deleuze is William Connolly and Jane Bennett, and they're very sort of mediocre, flat philosophers. They're not very interesting. They're just too politically correct and all that nonsense today. It's just not where it's at. They're not phallic at all. It's way more interesting to study Alain Badiou than to read William Connolly or Jane Bennett, to get at a different viewpoint, and somebody goes for the event fully, embrace it fully, and works with the multitude and with plurality and with the world that might not even be held together. What would he be like? You know, Marcus Gabriel, these guys, they all start from Badiou. He's a great philosopher that he forces you to rethink. And we do the event based on Badiou when we say process and event. We seriously believe there's a phallic event that happens in history that changes the course of history. It's called technology, if nothing else. But we also look at our own lives that way. But it's a nomatological series of events. But the really eventological events are the ones that changes history forever for all of humanity. Mm-hmm. That can be a narrative. That can be sending rockets into space and look down on the planet Earth and finally see what the planet Earth looks like from outer space. That alone, like Heidegger wrote in 1958, blew our minds, right? The atomic bomb, 1945, 6th of August. The world is forever changed after that experience. There's no way back. The atomic bomb cannot be put back as a genie into the bottle. The genie's out. We need to deal with it. We live in a world post-atomic bomb. It's an event. So these events change history forever. And this is Badiou's central thesis. This is anything but the eternal return of the same. We left the eternal return of the same, we settled down and started storing information. And we didn't repeat the same things over and over again. We started making the world different, for good or bad. Mm-hmm. And that forever changes everything. I think this is Zoroastrian's idea. I would say, in terms of great ideas, I mean, Nietzsche and Girard are geniuses in understanding the social. They're social philosophers. But in terms of just new ideas out there, that the Nietzsche and Girard work on other people's ideas. The new ideas are, Normatology was the original idea. We don't know who started that. It's at least 200,000 years old, probably more than that. It just came out of life itself. And, social animals would be nomatological or something. But then out of nomatology came the eventological idea, the Zoroaster, 3,007 years ago. And the only other idea on a par with that is Hegel's idea that you start with negation when you do dialectics. It's the only idea I can really think of that is on a par with those two ideas. Normatology, eventology, and dialectics, those Hegelian dialectics, in the sense that it starts with a negation. Subjectivity starts with a void. That's a fantastic understanding of what subjectivity is. And then it keeps itself busy with finding itself, which is exactly how it works, right?
You know, this Hegel thing, I need, I need more time with it. You know, I can't.
You love it once you get there. You love it. I mean, you think so much like a Hegelian already. And there is so much of Hegel in Nietzsche. There's no Nietzsche without Hegel. And there's certainly tons of Hegel in Girard too. And Heidegger definitely owes tons to Hegel too. But in different ways, if you go back to the origin, you find even more than these guys do. By the way, Slavoj Žižek has released 2 new books. One of them is absolute crap. And it's called A Left That Dare Speak Its Name. I became even less of a leftist after I read that book. It's so horrible. It's just Slavoj at his worst. He's just puking and spitting. He's just a maniac on a drive where he's just producing books. Does he eat? He probably eats hot dogs until it kills him or something. He's terribly unhealthy. You can tell he doesn't even take a walk, right? He just writes like a maniac, right? But that book is terrible. But the other new book, which is Hegel in a Wired Brain, is fantastic. And he finally makes the right move against Deleuze by saying that somebody said this would be the Deleuzean century. I think actually Foucault prophesied and said that in the 1980s, that the future is the Deleuzean age. And then he challenges that and said, no, I'm adamant it's going to be the Hegelian age. And finally the Hegelian age is going to happen. And he then takes Hegel into neuroscience and everything. And, you know, the first 3 pages of that book contain more knowledge and more original insight than the entire oeuvre of Žižek in the last 10 years. So the guy has both written a crappy book, I don't know who put that together, the publishing company, and then obviously he's worked properly on the other one, which is where he's got his heart. And I think Adrian Johnston, Slavoj Žižek, Jan Söderqvist are now fighting over Hegel, which is the right interpretation of Hegel. We're actually very close to each other, but they've got a transcendental materialism, which is Johnston. They've got a dialectical materialism, which is Slavoj Žižek. And we're going to kill materialism altogether with Brady Elling's help and create a transcendental emergentism instead, which I think is more Hegelian. There's more Spinoza and Hegel than these guys admit.
What was that about Spinoza?
Oh, Hegel is the collision of Kant versus Spinoza. So the Spinozist universe ends up flat and no freedom, no motivation, no pathos in it. It's just a very dead place. That's why it's so feminine. It's like, yeah, the virtue signalers today are all kind of vulgar Spinocists. Every one of them is a vulgar Spinocist today. It's just like, yeah, ecology is vulgar Spinocism. It's just, everything is oneness, vulgar Spinocism. It's just vulgar Spinocism. Maybe New Age essentially is vulgar Spinocism. The way Hegel reacted is that this is just dead philosophy. It's just flat. It's too easy. That's not how things work. And then Kant comes along, and Kant says that phenomenological and noumenal cannot meet and they're separated, meaning there is a separation in the world that Spinoza hasn't acknowledged. Okay? There's a problem after Kant with Spinoza. The Copernican turn Kant makes. He says there's a massive problem with Spinoza. You either go back to prior to Kant and you dig into that and you dwell in that, and Deleuze tried to do and failed. Or you actually do what Hegel did and said that what if we haven't really thought Kant all the way through properly and arrived at a monism that is process. It's not a dead space, it's process, it's thriving, and it's alive, and it's dialectical, and it's moving all the time. That's what Hegel does when he moves into transcendental idealism, but he moves away from the controversial by saying that, no, actually, the noumenal is completely, it's not even interesting. Just get rid of the noumenal altogether. We obviously collide with rocks all the time. It's a given. But we live in a world of phenomena, and the phenomenology of spirit, essentially, how does human spirit deal with the phenomenology we're approaching? Oh, it has done that in different ways throughout history. Hey, paradigms. Hey, historicism. Hey, historicity. And I'm totally with Hegel on all these things. We're living in a very historical world with events, and these events change history forever. And the question now, as always, is, will the anoject rise and create tyrant with terror? Or can we avoid that with still learning the lesson? We should learn from lynch mobs, learn the lesson, let them kill each other, for God's sake, and then see the hyperject rise, which is the force for constructive change of the world. Hyperject.
Hyperject, okay.
Hyperject. We agreed on the hyperject the last time. It's a good term because superject and Whitehead is different. Although they're related, because the Whitehead and superject is really the beginning of the hyperject. But the hyperject is a superject that goes out and acts in the world and does the right things, which is, of course, stopping the lynch mob. That's the first thing you do. Then providing forgiveness so you can try again. Second thing you do, you can then add to that list of what the high projective force does to create a better, more constructive world. Then I think we're on the right path. So, yeah, I agree. I'm with them. That I loved Spinoza when I was younger. I struggled with Kant. He was a bit boring. But I realized there's no movement to Spinoza's philosophy. He has the same problem that I found with Taoism in China. He said, you got yin and yang. He said, well, there has to be third force. And then people tell you, well, it's the border between yin and yang. That's just a border. This isn't really happening there. It's not a force. It doesn't put the thing on the move. It doesn't make it move. It's not it just doesn't explain why yin and yang should be processed. That's what Taoism lacks, and that's why it opens up the door. There must be something else in Chinese culture. You can't just sit with Taoism because it becomes banal. There has to be third force involved, and that is the Hegelian dialectics. It starts with negation, moves to abstraction, abstraction leads to concretion. The concretion then becomes the negation, meaning what is the concretion? Not itself. What is it in the concretion that is not fulfilled? Because there's no perfection anywhere in Hegel's philosophy. What in the concretion is it that is not concrete enough for the concretion to be concrete? That kickstarts the next negation, next dialectical process, and then it moves on. Zizek's argument that this is even valid for physics, I think, is in very risky territory when he says that. But I think it's certainly valid for human society and the human mind. And I'm perfectly happy with that. That's the only emergence vector where it's needed.
I have no idea, but it sounds like Buddhist shunyata a bit to me. It
sounds very vague.
Oh,
it sounds vague to Thomas.
Look into it. That's how you become reading.
Hegel always sounds very vague to me. Hegel, like, well, what does this actually mean? That's why I like Whitehead. It's also complicated, but you can really dig into it. Hegel is kind of a bit, but it's me. I mean, I haven't studied Hegel. I mean, I'm kind of...
I would say if you'd done the other way, you would say the same thing. So Hegel and Whitehead are on a par. I say you do the metaphysics with the two of them. And I think it's still, where Whitehead isn't accomplished his amazing project, you can still use Hegel to think it through properly. Whitehead is incredibly Hegelian. Of course, he's incredibly Hegelian.
No, we discussed that. It's true, Bradley,
yeah.
Right? So yeah. I'm sure that... I mean, I'm very. It's. I'll put it on my to-do list again. And
not the bad Hegel that the French read after the 1940s, because they misunderstood it completely. When Deleuze attacks Hegel, he hasn't even studied Hegel properly. He doesn't get it. That's exactly why he ends up in the wrong place. And I think this is the problem with contemporary Spinozism, is that it hasn't studied Hegel carefully enough to understand that Hegel's critique. Hegel loved Spinoza. He called Spinoza the Messiah of philosophy, but he then looked at what Spinoza was missing, and that's when he started moving. And that is why Western process philosophy starts and ends with Hegel, and it includes Whitehead. Process and event. These are the guys we need. We can work on these four guys, and then we can go back and study and restudy the East again and again and again. We'll probably find similar patterns, way older as well.
So Hegel, Whitehead, Girard, and Nietzsche.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Good. I'm on board.
Yeah. We'll tell our students, you got to get these guys eventually. It's going to be hard, long journey. Maybe don't jump into Hegel's Science of Logic the first thing you do, because that's like an incredible challenge, right? But once you do and you get it, and you understand how he thinks, and you really thinks he's completely misunderstood because it's very valid. But then you get, it's like Whitehead. To begin with, get the vocabulary. Just don't think you understand the words by themselves, because they use these words that you heard before in a completely different way than what you thought they would. You have to relearn language itself to study these masters.
Yeah, but it's always, deep thinkers always need to redefine at least parts of language.
I think Nietzsche and Girard are way easier in that way, but Hegel and Whitehead, because they're moving to the world of metaphysics, which is incredibly complex. Metaphysics and phenomenology, that's where they're located. Whereas with Nietzsche and Girard, we're in the philosophy of the social. This is social philosophy. This is understanding ourselves, our own predicaments, who we are, and where we're at in society today. It's existentialism.
That's why they don't need to invent a whole new vocabulary, because it's already there, whereas the other guys do. Is that what you're saying?
Come again, Andrew? I didn't get...
Oh, Nietzsche and Girard use the English language, right, as we know it, right? They're readable, kind of readable.
Well, Nietzsche wrote.
So they're not inventing a whole new vocabulary to describe a whole new territory, which these other guys need to do somehow.
But I'm always very, very suspicious when I encounter jargon and very complicated texts. And,
you should be, because in 99% of the cases, bullshit, but in 1% of the cases, most brilliant text you ever read.
Yeah, that's why I mean...
It's like taking ketamine. Nine ideas out of 10 you get on ketamine are rubbish, but the 10th idea is probably brilliant enough to be looked at. So, it's one of those things that, but just because almost all of it is shit, it doesn't mean there's gold in there, but there is gold in there. And actually, when you get it from Whitehead, when you get it, it's just like, could you have done it any other way? Probably not. Because as a philosopher, you sit there all the time. Are you going to invent new terms like anoject and hyperject? Yes, we had to, because we sat and had these conversations, wonderful conversations with you. And we realized that this voice coming from inside the Lynch book doesn't really have a name in a Western language. And jects, like in abject, subject, would make sense. Ano, meaning anonymous here, is like, oh, it's the voice that nobody subscribes, that nobody says they're that voice, but they all claim they're part of that voice, and they blame their own shortcomings on that voice. So there's this tricky little voice that just with the costume on it, and it becomes the tyrant. And when you realize that, then you can just go, well, what's the inversion of that? Oh, God, of course, that's a savior figure, like the social. He who stands up to the lynch mob and stops it, or even goes to the cross in case that's needed. Okay, that's a social, the Messiah. Who's he?
Overman.
Hyperject. So it's the very best in us, the most courageous in us, the most truth-seeking in us, the most heroic in us, the best we can possibly be, the optimization of our own selves, ethically speaking. If we, with some luck and with some hard work, can get to that point, we have hyper-objected ourselves. We've gone from superject to hyperject. And the hyperject can both be a role model and it can be the savior.
Oh, that's interesting. It's sort of like the archetype, but something new.
The ultimate hero.
But that's the Nietzschean overman.
Yes.
And that stands up against the herd and that goes beyond the herd thinking.
Yes, and that's what we agreed last time, that the Zoroastrian in Zoroastrianism, the Moshiach in Judaism, the Savior in Christianity, and the overman in Nietzsche actually are the same figure, in the sense that this is the guy who stands up to the mediocrity of the lynch mob, the banality of the lynch mob, and say, humans can do better. At least I can do better, and I will show you how you do better. And if you only mimic me, it will be better than this fucking trash I got in front of me. That's essentially what the overman says, right? It was even Marx's dream of the proletariat. And if you got to say anything of Marx, and I think we should reread him correctly this time, and it helps. We can throw Marx at the woke.
The proletariat.
The woke people hate Marx because they never read him and they had no idea, because he was heroic, but he would hate the woke people. He would have hated them. But with Marx, it's the proletariat, and the proletariat he loves the capitalists and said, we could probably do better than that. This would not be the end of history. Like we do, for example, with Syntheism, we say, why would atheism be the last of all of this? It's probably just a little blip in history. It's not even properly thought through. Okay, we take God from the past and say, it's not a created God who's bored on a cloud. We just put God in the future instead. What do you say now? And the atheists go, oops, you're not allowed to do that. And we say, why not? And then we expose them. They hadn't even thought of it. They hadn't thought of the Hegelian negation again. They haven't thought of, you could just take the God word and think of it. What is it all about? And let's put it, well, what can we put it somewhere? If it does not exist yet, throw it into the future. What happens then? Oh my God, religion is back. Whew, that's a typical Hegelian turn. See if we could do that, Whitehead. I'm going to talk to Red Illing tomorrow, our genius, our Copenhagen genius. Thomas,
Ellen, yeah.
Thomas is my shared adoption.
Yeah. I'm very much looking forward to your podcast.
Yes. And please do Whitehead without us. We want to hear the two of you talk about Whitehead and put in the parallax.
We're going to do it on this book because I want to understand Whitehead's metaphysics from the point of view of quantum mechanics.
Brilliant.
So, because then you can be very precise. What are eternal objects? What's concretion? What is the superject? And because Whitehead wrote his metaphysics such that it's compatible with both relativity theory and quantum mechanics. And so rather than just reading his words, so this book is basically about how quantum mechanics fits into a Whiteheadian framework. And it's not Deepak Chopra, right? It is it's pretty solid. So I think that's going to make the metaphysics of Whitehead extremely precise up to mathematical detail. So that's what we're up to.
Fantastic. Yeah. And by the way, we should add that without Whitehead, there wouldn't be quantum mechanics the way we understand it. Max Bohr wouldn't have thought the way he did. Whitehead was ahead of them. He wrote about this in 1925.
Yeah, I don't know how much. I mean, he wrote definitely about relativity theory. He had his own theory, but I don't know how much influence he had on physics. Whitehead. I mean, he was definitely very important for mathematics, right?
I think that book should solve that issue because it's also a historical book. So it probably deals with Whitehead's relationship with the quantum mechanics, quantum physicists. The physicists of the 1920s and Whitehead were obviously Bertrand Russell and Whitehead was one of the world's leading mathematicians. I mean, Principia Mathematica had made him a massive academic figure in America. So there's always a connection. I think that book, I haven't read the book, the book probably solves the issue of what was the actual relationship and how did they relate to each other and learn from each other and inspire each other. This is the 1920s. This is the golden age of quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
So Whitehead was in the middle of it, but he also he had left mathematics essentially and moved into philosophy and theology. That's what he was interested in. And that's what makes him stand out, makes him a genius.
That's why he's a unique philosopher, right? All the others like Heidegger and Hegel and what have you, I mean, they were not mathematicians or they didn't understand physics. So this is one of the only great philosophers who was also a brilliant physicist and a brilliant mathematician. That's, of course, why I like Whitehead.
Yeah, he was a Leibniz of the 20th century.
Yeah,
he's the Leibniz of the 20th century. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Love to hear that. Love to dig into a conversation. That's going to be the one podcast I really want to hear this fall.
Well, let's see where it goes. It's ambitious.
It is very ambitious.
Yeah. We'll put
and I will credit you for it if I write about it. So there you go.
Fantastic.
It's part of the overall product, which is transcendental emergentism.
So what do you eat for breakfast, Alexander? Like Hegel for breakfast? Hegel and Whitehead for breakfast?
I read Hegel before I open my email box and get depressed. Yes. I love books. I love books more than anything in the world. And I love my family. I love the people I live with. And I love my books. I'm an agoraphobic. I hate people, except for you guys.
Not really.
Why save them? It's just like, why even bother? It's just like, I'm pro-intelligence. I'm not pro-life. And I'm pro-transcendence. Maybe that is what life is in a way, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's a good way to end, I think.
Yeah, I think
that final statement.
Sexuality is the one forgiving quality about humanity.
That's a good way to end.
It can be fucked.
Thank goodness for that. Yeah.
All right. Good.
All right. Wonderful conversation.
Thank you,
Love
guys.
your debates and good luck with the edits. Wonderful, wonderful, sweet, Andrew. You're left for the hard work of editing this shit afterwards. But you do a brilliant job at it.
Yeah. No.
And I love the
great.
roughness of it. I'm so proud of being part of this.